if you guys are cool with that.
You're gonna do
Sure.
what?
I'm gonna record the session, the Zoom session.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Just this
I'm
first
cool
part
with
of
it.
Okay. So gather round, warm yourselves by the fire. Octavius plays his instruments with ethereal hands. I've told you of my unusual upbringing, but I've yet to tell you the story of how I was saved and what price my father paid to do so. If you will indulge me, I'd like to share my tale in verse. A princess once there lived, her voice divine indeed, her father's love given freely, the king of all you see. One day, my mother Victoria laid eyes on my father Mallory. A knight did serve this king, the strongest of the guard. His eyes met hers adoringly, the king was most displeased. You see, my father was human and not of noble birth, and thus my grandfather vehemently disapproved of their union. But after many passionate protests, my grandfather's heart softened, and he allowed the marriage to proceed. With blessings from the crown, the nations gathered round. Nobility of great revere brought gifts abundantly. It was a joyous day, I'm told. In spite of my grandfather's reservations, he did everything in his power to gather the most noteworthy and exotic collections of peoples and creatures he could muster. He even commissioned an orchestra just to serve at my mother's pleasure. But of all the extravagant gifts and proceedings, perhaps the most unique and fateful was the gift of a life. Torville, the last vestige of a long-forgotten realm and longtime ward of the king, offered his life in service to my mother and father. They accepted, and he actually served as coachman on my parents' honeymoon. In luxury they rode to see all they could see. In dry desert a well they saw, a curiosity. They wondered if this could be the well of infinite thunders. It was thought that the desert had once been a vast sea. A calamity was to have occurred that drained the sea into another plain. Only a large water well was left, but the ground around the well quaked constantly, a scar of the calamity. That night, they found a small outpost near the well where they took refuge from a dust storm that had arisen rather abruptly. Most nights on their months-long journey, they were spent in frivolity, but this night they fell fast asleep. When slumber took their side, a thief did come to steal. With deftness, guile, and boundless speed was her captivity. My father awoke alone. He sought out Torville, and together they searched the outpost. One man had seen a rider in the night head off into the storm towards the well, so my father and Torville took off. But all they found when they arrived was a desert oasis devoid of royalty. After many more days of thorough questioning and searching a large swath of the desert, they had to seek out additional resources. And feeling the weight of his responsibility, my father opted to return to tell the king in person that my mother had gone missing. A king stricken with grief, those round him ever bleak, his fury placed upon the knight whose head the king now seeks. My grandfather's fury fell squarely on my father, and so my father fled with the help of some of the guard. He met up with Torville, who had stayed behind at the Thundering Well. The two were left with few resources and no trace of where my mother, and I in her womb, had gone. From danger night did flee, was making no inroads. For years he sought his lovely bride, his confidence erodes. My father scraped by with the help of Torville, who remained where my mother was last seen. But over the months and years, my father got increasingly desperate. As things became more dire, he was forced into thievery to survive. He fell in with those that moved in shadow, and ultimately, despair and grief drove him mad. With hope a fleeting thought, his fate was all but rode. Toward bane-filled destiny he rode, till evil took his soul. As my father searched the world for my mother, she and I lived out our days in constant fear of our captor's wrath. He loathed my infant years, but had the patience to have my mother teach me her melodic ways. It was her song, and eventually mine, that kept us alive. We sang at the dragon's pleasure. By day, the dragon roamed the world above, while we stayed in his desert lair hidden by magic. The dragon's horde grew, as did I, and I dared to search for escape a time or two, but somehow I was always found out. 'Twas dragon did the deed, a noble song he seeks. In desert lair did babe she bore, was raised as dragon pleased. It was nearing my 13th birthday, or so we estimated. As I grew, my mother feared that I would become emboldened by my burgeoning strength to escape. And she feared for my life, but this was not to be my fate. Abiding torture, lo, a hero cloaked in black, did vanquish dragon lair, and all with mother child did flee. The figure was a ghostly form, and my mother swears she saw my father's effigy. All I saw was death come for the dragon. We fled for the reaches of the cavern, which collapsed on them, leaving a narrow way out, and we never saw the dragon or his slayer again. That is the tale of my father, my childhood, and my upbringing.
Audramil has a tear in his